This is the beginning of a new season of, particularly to us, important videos of established and popular members of the profession. And on the next occasion, on the 23rd of November, we shall be talking with Jean Hunnisett, the costumer. The resulting videos that come from this series are held at the Theatre Museum, and indeed we have them to thank for the facilities of this series of video recordings. And they can be viewed by arrangement, and I think at the end of the meeting Joe can let us know exactly how that can happen. The committee generally welcomes new members. We have a thrust as a result of our committee meeting this afternoon to try and engage the young. At this point I agree not to look around the room with any particular focus. But we do have a young man who happens to share my name, Jason. I haven't introduced myself. For those who don't know me, my name is Jason Barnes, and I'm supposed to be back at the National Theatre earning a living, but I've slipped away this afternoon to do this. It's a great pleasure for me to have known Michael Hallifax for nearly 30 years. And for me, I think he is characterised by two nicknames. Now, nicknames are often, as I think these were, forged with affection. And in Michael's case, with respect for his focused determination and his supreme diplomacy. I give you the Duchess, the shark with the pearly teeth.
Good afternoon, everybody. I had the pleasure of working with Michael for a lot less than Jason, but we did share many hours together on tour, specifically in very strange places, sometimes waiting for things to happen. And I think it's a great privilege that he's with us. He has an awful lot to say. We've had a longish chat before, and we did set a precedent some time ago with another interviewee where we really realized that the time we had wasn't enough, and the museum kindly opened the facility again for a further interview, not to the public, but en prive. So, Michael, you needn't feel too worried if we've missed something. Of course, you started work before the war. I understood from you that you had another job and that you had to pretend to be ill to go and get your first work in the theatre.
That's right, yes. I don't think people knew really what they should do with me when I was, 17 or something. And my father and the chief of police in Winchester were getting together. They were actually working out how the first traffic lights through Winchester were going to operate. It was a tricky crossroads, or it wasn't quite a cross that they had to work out. And I think when they were sort of chatting after that, my father must have said, I don't know what I'm going to do with that chap. And the policeman said, well, he should join the police. So I was sent up to London to become a civilian clerk with the police force, and I was sent to G Division, which is Hackney, and I worked there in the general office. But I was staying in a TOC H hostel, which was an amazing organisation which the Reverend Tubby Clayton had organised after the Great War. And this was a hangover for that. And he took huge houses around London and divided them up into dormitories and the dining rooms and such like. And we had such a house in Hackney, and it was very lucky. It was a 10-minute walk through to the police station, so that was easy, no fares. And the houses were always run by a matron, and the matron here had her little office on a half landing. And going up one evening after dinner, her door was always open. It was a sort of green room as far as really, I suppose. And I went in, and she had the evening papers there. And out of the 3 that were going at the time, it was the Evening News that I picked up. And in a very narrow strip column of oddments, it said that 3 well-known West End actors were going to get together, and they were going to start a repertory company in Hammersmith. And I thought, because I wanted to go into the theatre, but I had absolutely no idea how one went about it. I mean, living in Winchester, how would one know how you got into the West End Theatre? So there were three names of Wilson Barrett, Esmond Knight, I didn't know either of those, and Noel Howlett. Well, Noel I'd seen in George and Margaret on the West End stage, and I thought, well, he's not a young chap, so he might listen kindly. So I wrote to him and I said I didn't think they'd get on very well if they didn't have my help. And to my surprise, they wrote back and said, please present yourself to the territorial office in the territorial hall, about 2 or 3 doors away from the King's Theatre in Hammersmith, on such and such a day at such and such a time, and ask for the stage director, and he will interview you. Well, then the problem was, which is really where you started, was how to get out of the general office on a day, because the police were rather strict, and there was no time off, and we worked 6 days a week and such like. So I went to I can't call him my friend, but he was a very, very kindly man who was in charge of this general office, Sergeant Bartlett. And I had a private word with him and said, this is very important to me, and would it be possible for me to get across to Hammersmith? And it was quite a journey, of course. I mean, it's right across from one side of London to another. So he said, well, I think the best thing you can do is don't come in that day at all. And I will say you're feeling a bit off colour. And then come in tomorrow and say, oh, I'm feeling much better, thank you so much, it's great. So I caught my number 6 bus and went through to the middle of London. Then I caught another one down to Hammersmith. And I found this hall and went in. And I found George Larchet, who was the stage director. And we had a talk. I mean, I don't know now what we talked about, but anyway, we chatted. And he said, all right, young fellow, off you go, and we'll write to you. So I thought, fine. I thought that was going to be the end of it. And then 2 days later, I got a letter saying, please join us as soon as you can. So I went to Sergeant Bartlett and said, I'm afraid I'm going to leave you. And there was uproar from the superintendent down. They couldn't think why a young civilian clerk was giving in his notice. And it never happened before. It was outrageous. And they said, well, you must give us a month's notice. A month? I mean, for me doing nothing except writing up sort of fatal casualties in Whipps Cross Hospital. And so I had to give my month's notice. I got in touch with the company, and they said, okay. So I started with them just the first week that they were opening in the middle of January 1939. And I just kept myself out of the way as much as possible. And I found there was a stage manager, a lovely, lovely girl called Stella Batten. And she had a flippity-gibbet of a sweet, attractive girl. What's her name? Buddy, I think
Biddy?
it was something. Biddy, was
Biddy.
it? Biddy, thank you. Biddy Crozier. And they said, well, just watch to see what was going on. And so I just dropped into the company and I became the call boy. I wasn't paid anything, I forgot to say that. So they said, you know, come for nothing. So I said, fine.
So your first week's wages was nothing?
And the second, and the third, and the fourth. Don't kid yourself. So my mother said, well, she would pay for the Toc H, the cost of the Toc H, which was in Putney. Again, it was very lucky. So I had to pay. I mean, I had saved up from being in the police. I mean, they paid me something like 5 shillings a week. So I saved on that. And I used to walk up every day from Putney to be up there. It was just a longish walk. But then I was away all day. And then got back to, because it was an 8 o'clock start, the shows, they'd run for about 2.5 hours, 10:30. So I used to be back about 11:30, I suppose. Mm. And they said, well, we can't cook you a special dinner, but we shall owe you a dinner, so we'll put it in the Arga. So I used to get back, and this poor meal had been sitting in the Arga for about 4 hours, but it was food, so that was very good.
And so you were doing this at the Hammersmith?
Mm-hmm. No, King's.
King's. And presumably, was it a fairly broken down theatre at the time? Was it?
It was a beautiful theatre.
Lovely.
Yeah, excellent. It was very, very good indeed. George Larchet said, you're terribly lucky because this is going to be a 2-week. We're going to play for 2 weeks. Were we going to play for 2 weeks? No, we weren't. We were going to rehearse for 2 weeks. And he said a lot of companies are weekly, so you rehearse 1 week.
So you're a step up from weekly rare.
Mm. That's right.
Shall I top you up?
he said, now the system here is that on a Monday we just concentrate on the new play that's going on that night. And on the Tuesday morning, we rehearse, just for the morning, the play that's going on the following week. But Tuesday afternoon, we rehearse the play that's going on the week after that. So, with Thursday matinees, so we had, this was, for the next week, we had, not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, then it was the matinee, Friday morning, Saturday morning, and then it was on the next week. But the other play was Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, Friday afternoon. So you had 3 afternoons. It was quite a good run, that, before you got to the other play.
Did you let have a lot of schizophrenia amongst the companies? They tried to learn 3 different parts at the same time?
No, they thought it was just absolutely wonderful. They were
loved it.
absolutely staggered, yes. But what the management was able to do was to ask very few, but we had a lot of people from West End to fill in with the odd gaps and the odd characters. But we also had 1 or 2 stars. Ivan Novello brought down Phyllis Monkman. She was very much his protege. And then we did one of his plays, I suppose, to make up. And she was Sadie Thompson in Rain. And this was the wonderful occasion when, by that time, I was on the book. And she came round to make an entrance into Rain. And she stood there and she had to say, Reverend Davidson, Reverend Davidson. And he was going to be sort of, this is Scylla and Charybdis time, and he had to try not to call her in, etc. So she stood there, and she suddenly said, I haven't got my knickers on. Well, for a 19-year-old boy, it was kind of worrying. What was I supposed to do? So she said, I must get them. So I say, off she went. So I did Reverend Davidson. And I managed to keep Esmond Knight, who was the Reverend Davison, going with his awful sort of suddenly sort of rather high male voice coming through. And then thudder, 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 and back she came with her knickers on. So we were all right. But it was, who's the other one? Peggy Wood came down, and she was in the star in operette. She came down for a show as well. But it was very special. George said that several of the companies up and down England, they actually had 2 shows a week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 1 show. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, another. And to make sure you got your money's worth, it was twice nightly. I mean, how they worked, I have absolutely no idea.
Yes, one shudders to think about it.
Absolutely.
So how long were you there, Michael, before you moved on?
Oh, well, I didn't actually move on as such.
You got promoted?
I got promoted, yes. Biddy left us, and I was made up to an ASM, and I got paid. It was rather a horrendous engagement, because one night I was talking to Stella, and Bill Barrett came up, and he said, can you manage without Michael tonight, Stella? And she said, yes, fine. So he said, would you like to go to the Chiswick Empire and see a show? So I said, oh, fine. I thought, I wasn't quite sure what this was going to be. Is that the way one talked? Anyway, so off we went in a cab. Well, we saw the show, but in the interval, he suddenly turned around and he said, Teddy, that's Esmond Knight, Teddy Knight and I are very pleased with your work, and we'd like to make you the ASM, and we're going to pay you, I think I got 10 shillings a week. And that was a real fortune. That was wonderful. And
more
so
than the police.
I got moved up. Yes, much more. Got moved up. And then I took a tour out. I took Fallen Angels. I was very grumpy about this. I took Fallen Angels. We went on tour to Wimbledon. So this was a big move. This was rather exciting. But I was made a stage manager for that. It was great. But what I really wanted to do, I wanted the other company, they were doing a new Nicky Phipps play. And that was going to be televised. And of course, it had to be live. And I wanted to go up with the company that was doing the
Well, this was the very, very early days of television.
Oh, very early, yeah. Well, it wasn't. It was 37 or something he started, so it'd been going a couple of years. But very few people had television sets. But then I moved on, and then we got to the end of June, and we were going to go up to Edinburgh for a season, for a summer season up there. And we're going to the Empire Theatre, which is now the Festival Theatre. And we... Stella eventually said that she really couldn't leave the farm and the family and all the rest of it. So she stayed behind. So Bill and Noel dropped out, and so Bill Barrett and Esmond Knight made me up to a full stage manager. I had 2 boys as my ASMs, and off we went up there. And the
Can I
season...
just stop you for saying that when you went on tour to Wimbledon, did you actually take the set from Hammersmith to Wimbledon in a lorry?
The whole thing
The
we
whole
did,
thing,
Joe.
and you
yes.
supervised, you sort of stood it up at Wimbledon and said that looks fine, and that was your job as well? Did you have a technical crew?
I think George came with us, George Larchet, I would have thought, as stage director. I can't really remember that. I can remember going down and I can remember the play. But
did you have to sort out dressing room lists and things?
Oh, I imagine so, yes. Oh, yes, I'm sure.
Sorry, I just had to just get the weight of it. So anyway, you were in Edinburgh, and...
the season was to go until the 2nd of September. But, I mean, during the summer, when at the King's, Nelson Linklater, who later became Dick Linklater, he was the assistant manager at the King's. And he and I went along to because there was so much talk about we might be at war. You know, this was after the Munich thing and peace in our peace in our time. And he and I went along to the territorial office and said, you know, can we join up? Can we become a territorial? Because we feel we ought to do our bit. So the guy there said, oh, great, young men like you, we need you. Now, I was just going to say we rehearse. We drill on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, evenings or something. And we said, oh, but we work every evening. So he said, right, I'll cross you off, you know, that was that. So when I got up to Scotland, I found that the Scots were taking it might be war very, very seriously. So instead of drinking to moderation, they drank beyond. And it was, and it was really quite worrying. And after a time, we used to take the girls back to their, you know, to see them into their digs, because really, I mean, it was hard to get across from one pavement into the street because you had to climb over people in the gutters. It was really amazing. And then just as it got towards, I'm leading up to being September the 3rd, being the start of what they like to call the Second World War. And our season was going to finish on the Saturday the 2nd, I mean, quite by chance. But as it got nearer and nearer to that time, so our houses got less and less. And it was an enormous, that theatre is absolutely vast. To take a rep company in there was really very brave. But finally we got to the Saturday night, and my two ASMs and myself, we'd packed as much as we could of the season, and we'd had to bring everything up for a weekly rep. And then I went back to the digs, lovely Miss Howie at 58 Arden Street, and she was terribly worried. Everybody was on that Saturday night. I don't think anybody came to the theatre. They were all screaming and shrieking around the roads. And by that time, territorials, you saw a lot of them. The lorries were going up and down Princes Street and such like, loaded with territorials. They'd been called up. And then came the Sunday morning, and I had arranged with the two ASMs that we would all meet at 9 o'clock up at the theatre to finish the packing of that show, which was, strange enough, it was the middle watch. And I played a flag lieutenant, and I mean, I did a lot of acting, I can't tell you. And I thought, is this telling me something? I've been playing a flag lieutenant, and then the next day it was war. And Miss Howie saw me go in the morning, and she said, you're the only one with a wireless set. Could you please be back at 11 when Chamberlain's going to talk to us, and we'll listen to it on your set. So I had this funny, rather like a little attaché case, this portable radio. So I took that back at 11 because the boys hadn't turned up. I mean, it was just me in the theatre. I didn't blame them. And then I went back and we heard that we were at war. And I mean, we just all looked at each other and said, you know, what does that mean? So I said, well, I think it means I go back to the theatre and pack even more quickly because I don't know what's going to happen. So I went back to the theatre, still no sign of anybody. And that theatre creaked and groaned, and it was really spooky there, to say the least. And
you had a key to the door, did you?
No, I think there must have been a stage doorkeeper, but not around. I mean, he just stuck in his little thing. It's you, as I, you know, this sort of thing. So, and then I was up all by myself on about the 5th floor, because of course we had a chorus room. That's where the stage management were put. And suddenly the first of the air raid sirens went off, and it really does shake you, because we'd heard about we were all going to be given poison gas, and there would be total bombing of the whole of the British Isles and such like. It was not a good scene, and I had nobody to talk to, which is very sad. So I finished the packing and went downstairs and got back, and Miss Howie said that Bill Barrett had phoned, and would I go to such and such a school at such and such a time in the afternoon, and he would arrange that we were all given our gas masks. And we got ahead. I mean, we were past all these queues of people way down the street waiting for their gas masks, and we all swept into their fury, so we weren't very popular. And then we all met up in the North British that evening, and we stayed 2 or 3 days, and then that was that.
And you were called up?
I was called up, yeah.
And you apparently did 6.5, you did the whole session, you did the full
I did the
bit.
whole thing,
whole
yes,
bit, yes.
from A to Z, yeah. Yes.
Michael did tell me once on tour that I think you were in Italy, and you were somewhat disturbed by what's now called collateral fire from our own forces, who punctured your tin of porridge.
Oh, it was awful, yes, awful.
Yes, you went hungry that morning.
Yeah, we certainly did. Yes, we were strafed by this plane, which came down this little wadi where we were nicely tucked away, and it went and disappeared. And it was a shriek, and I thought, oh God, somebody's been hit. And he said, it's the Dixie, sir, it's the Dixie, our porridge is gone. And it was a real disaster time.
Well, yes, all that happened, and then you got back out into ordinary life. I suppose that most of your 20s passed by.
Yeah, well, I was 26 or something when the war was over.
And you came presumably back to London, and you got involved in something you mentioned called the Reunion Theatre Guild.
Yeah, amazing organisation. We came back, and what we found, all of us, but I suppose particularly stage management, because there are so few stage managers compared with large casts, we got back, and I mean, I would go for an interview, and they'd say, oh, fine, yes. Now then, what have you been doing? So I said, well, in the army. Oh, yes, yes. Yes, that's very interesting. 6.5 years. Yes, yes, I see. Fine. Well, thank you so much. And well, let you know. And you knew that Miss Bloggs was getting it. And Miss Bloggs had been working in the West End. I mean, I don't mean to say it was comfortable in London, but she'd actually been here and working, and so had a good CV by that time. And she would get the job, and I wouldn't. But I was like this. What Reunion Theatre Guild was that, particularly Torrin Thatcher and Nigel Patrick, who were both established actors, and they got together and they organised a room somewhere in the West End as a sort of club room, and we could all go there, and usual affair. But there was a large notice board on which any notice of any jobs were put up there. And I got a job from that because it said that David Stewart was coming down from Perth, and he was looking for a stage manager, and he gave me that job, which was great. So that started me off. But again, when I went up there, that's why I got muddled to begin with, because that was the place that they were going into twice weekly, but just ordinary rehearsals, none of this double rehearsal, because what they had been working in this beautiful little theatre, the Perth Theatre. David Stewart and Marjorie Dents, that was sort of the leading lights there. Marjorie did all the administration and David did the artistic side. But we were going to play not only in that theatre, but in the Adam Smith Hall at Kirkcaldy, and that was 30 miles away. But it was fine, but it did mean that when it was the Kirkcaldy week, 30 miles, you had to leave, I don't know, something like 5 o'clock in the evening to get over there in rather a rickety old coach. And you arrived at this ghastly hall, and it was dead flat with separate chairs, just ordinary chairs, no rows of seats. And then just a raised platform at the far end. And it had, I think, 2 plugs in the back wall, and that was for your lighting, and that was it, no nonsense there.
On or off.
Yes. And when people came in, or more often they went out, the noise was quite extraordinary, because it was just, there were no carpets or anything like that, of course.
Oh, creak, creak.
Stamp.
Stamp.
Yes, out they went. But that was Perth. But it was a very good place, and we did a lot of very good work, and a strong company. It was really, the company, most of the company had been, up till that time, they'd been living in the theatre, living over the shop because of the war. It was better to do that because you could pool your rations, etc., and it made everything very easy. But something that I was just thinking about Perth the other day, and I remembered that there was a Wilfred Bentley, Bill Bentley, who did a lot of the productions there, as well as acting, and his wife Valerie Lush, who was an actress in the company and still is around acting. And they had a little dog, And he always went up, as soon as they came into the theatre, he would go up and sit in his basket up in the dressing room. And he would never move, not move from there, until they played God Save the King. And as soon as the anthem started, he would come, you'd hear pitter-patter, and down the stairs he came, and he walked around the stage, I suppose, just checking that everything was all right. And then he went back and joined them, and he was satisfied. Yes, amazing, amazing. Same as, just thinking of that, I can't think what show we were doing at the King's at Hammersmith, and I was on the book, and it had a big staircase for some reason, and then the acting areas either side. And in the middle of the show, suddenly, I remember a little dog appeared. And down the steps he came, and it walked and went off. And I never saw him again, and nobody ever mentioned it. So it's peculiar. I wondered after that, whether it was the Bentley dog doing his act down in London.
When we talked before, you mentioned that you'd come across an actor called Larry Skinkley during one of these reunion showcases.
Oh, yes, yes. Well, that was at the end of Perth. I got pleurisy, and the doctor said, "Oh, you're not very well." So I said, "You don't have to tell me that." And he said, "You really ought to go into hospital." So I said, "Oh gosh, I don't know that I can get away." But since I couldn't move, nowhere else to go. So he said, "Actually, the hospital in Perth is rather a rough place. If you could afford it, I could put you into a nursing home." So I said, "Well, how many days is this?" So he said, 5 days. So I said, "Yes, I can afford it," not knowing what it was going to cost. I said, "I can afford it." So I was taken into this nursing home. And I was there for 56 days because I was rather poorly,
you must have been,
to say the least. And when I came out, it was very difficult. I could only walk a few yards and so on. It was very dramatic, this. And I stayed with some sweet people in Brentford. And I slowly got better. And then I was sent out to Switzerland by some cousins, and I got quite better. But when I came back, I then had to start again. And the doctor said, "No way must you go back into the theatre, and absolutely no way must you ever be a stage manager again, because it'll kill you, because you're in a pretty dicky state." So I went straight back into the theatre. And I got a job through Reunion Theatre Guild, because when I came back from Switzerland, I saw Torrin. He said, "Just the person I'm looking for. I want a guardsman, so I want somebody tall who could just stand in a show we're going to do at the Comedy." And this was a Sunday night play, and what they did, they took over West End theatres, and you could move the furniture, but not the set, of course. And plays were directed to fit in with that particular setting. And I don't know what the show was at the Comedy, but we went there. And I went into the dressing room, and there was this young chap, and he said his name was Larry Skinkley, and his parents were Polish. And so when was this? Something like 48 or something. And I met up with him again. He came to us at the Royal Court in 1957, and he was playing Mr. Horner, because by that time he was Lawrence Harvey. So the change was great.
Moved on.
Yes, he certainly moved on.
Moved on.
Yes. But that was through Reunion Theatre Guild. That was wonderful of them.
And there was one thing I wrote down here about a motorcycle gag, which we might have missed.
Oh, yes.
Is it worth talking about?
Well, I'll tell you, since you've mentioned it.
Yes.
I don't want to disappoint people. This was the very, very end of the war, and I was out in Greece, and we were at Philothea, which is about 12 miles out of Athens. And our worthy colonel got us together at one time, I suppose when we knew the war was coming to an end. It was finished as far as we were concerned in Greece. It was just in Europe by that time. And he said, "We're going to put on a tattoo. We want to do something for the local populace." So we all said, "Oh, yes, great." And so he said, you, Halifax, you were in the theatre or something like that. "Well, you can do something." So that was me. So I went away, and I got in touch with a marvellous little bombardier, we were gunners, called Snuffy Bulmer. And Snuffy was called Snuffy because he took snuff all the time. He didn't smoke, he took snuff. And what we did, we developed a little act whereby he converted one of the army motorbike and sidecar. He adapted the sidecar, and because he was very small, adapted it so he could get in, and he cut a little piece out of the front and put gauze across it so that he could see where the motorcycle was going. And then he took all the controls down and put those in there, and then he curled himself up inside. And then the gag was that I drove on. I was a great motorcyclist. I drove on with this in the middle of this tattoo, and I went up to the microphone, and I started a very sort of pompous speech about how wonderful it was to be there, etc. And then very, very slowly, the motorcycle began to move away. So as I was talking very slowly, I got the back of it, and Snuffy let me pull it back, you see. So then, of course, I went on with my speech, and again, this moved away. And then it went further and further. And then the audience suddenly realized that, that there was something strange going on because this thing was moving. So it was a case of then chasing it round. But it was a wow.
It's fun.
If anybody wants to use it, it's a great gag.
But you need a Snuffy.
Yes.
Right, so, well, obviously you did say you had been very poorly and nearly passed away. Thank God you didn't. So you now felt better, and you got back into work again. I have also notes here regarding Embassy Swiss Cottage, Hal Stewart and people like that.
Oh, yes. What did I do? I didn't go straight to that. Yes, Hal D. Stewart wrote a play called The First Victoria, and that was about Boadicea. And through, this was after Ipswich, we've missed out Ipswich, but anyway, I was a stage manager on that, and it was a really stinko play. Had quite a good cast. I mean, a stinko as far as I was concerned, because it was, apparently, I hadn't ever thought of it, they used bows and arrows in the days of Boadicea. So we had to have all these trick arrows on the set. And they were awful, because you had to, and there it was, if it fell down. But often it went, so I didn't enjoy that play at all. We toured with it a little bit, but it wasn't very good.
So it sounds like there was quite a circuit in London, sort of Wimbledon, Swiss Cottage, Hammersmith, sort of outer London, sort of spin around. Chiswick, presumably, as well?
No, but Chiswick was the
variety
music hall, you see, yes. No, I don't think so. There's the sort of theatres. I mean, I don't know how Swiss Cottage came into it, but because the next show I did was also at Swiss Cottage. But I think just it was almost a producing house, Swiss Cottage, but I can't think of it as the main number one, which was Golders Green and Streatham Hill and such like. They were the big theatres that one toured to. But after First Victoria, then it was.
When did you start in the West End? You worked at Tenants for some time.
Yes, it's after we did. It was the next one at Swiss Cottage was something called Always Afternoon, which our leading player was Ernest Thesiger. He was about 70, I think, then, and I understudied him. Luckily, he was always on. And we started in Embassy, and then we were transferred. We went down to the Garrick. So, I mean, from that point of view, as a stage manager, it was that play. But that play was the strange one because Ernest had this young wife who was Margaret Johnston, and she had a young lover who was a very dishy French boy called Christian Marcon. And that's all I can remember, except that Ernest had a pet rabbit. And this rabbit he carried about with him all the time, and it sat during scenes with him. And so I engaged Alwyn, and Ernest used to carry her around. Well, she was very good. She was a very good little actress, and she stayed very still. But then for some reason, I suppose it was because we'd gone into the West End and he had another job, because he left us, and Dennis Blakelock was going to take over. And every time I used to go in to see Ernest before his last few performances, he'd say, "How is Dennis getting along with rehearsing?" And I'd say, "Oh, he's doing fine, Ernest, fine. And what about the rabbit?" So I had to confess that Dennis said, "I'm not going to touch that rabbit. I hate it." So I said, "You've got to." So I gave him a little sort of cushion pillow thing, and he cuddled that until we got about the dress rehearsal, and I said, you've really got to face up to you've got to carry the rabbit. What I didn't tell him was that the night before, Ernest said, I'm going to cast a spell on Olwyn. So I said, well, okay, fine. I said, do that. So came the dress rehearsal, and poor Dennis had to take this beautiful white rabbit, and to my amazement, she was lay quite still and didn't, while he was walking about. Then he had this long scene sitting in this centre chair, and that was fine. She didn't seem to move, and I thought, oh, thank God. And so then he had to get up and walk off, and then we take the rabbit from him, and I think that was the end of her act. And there was a scream from off stage, and he came rushing back on and said, look what this rabbit has done. And she'd been terribly busy during the scene. She'd very slowly clipped her way up the lapel of his jacket, and it was absolutely even all the way up. So we had to get rid of Olwen, and her understudy had to play, and she didn't do anything like that, thank goodness. But that
she
was,
retired.
yes, I think she had babies.
Yes,
so that was my introduction to the West End.
And you also told me you were a champion cleat line thrower at one point. You must have an awful lot of scene changing.
Well, you had to. I mean,
suppose you're quite tall, aren't you? It does help.
I don't know that it does, because it doesn't matter. But I mean, all these not at King's Hammersmith. I never touched scenery there. But I mean, in Perth, all the months and months I was at Perth, one was cleating and uncleating all the time. I loved it. I mean, I always feel it's sad now that people. I don't know. I don't know if a cleat exists anymore. I can't think that it does.
Not a lot.
But that was great.
Let's move on. You worked with tenants. You worked with people like Ian Dow, and so on for some time, I understand.
Yes, I did a lot of shows, 6 or 7, I think, shows with tenants. I mean, I thought I was badly off, because every show I got, it never lasted very long. But other people were saying, well, you're so lucky because you're getting experience. But what I didn't get was money, because you didn't get paid for the first 2 weeks of rehearsal, and I think it was half pay for the second 2 weeks of rehearsal. And then you got the miserly amount that one was given in those days. But other than that, of course, I was clocking up the experience.
Did Joe Davis light all those shows?
Oh yes. Because they were, I mean, you've missed out all my shows, but I mean they were big.
We have a lot to do.
and we had a lot of well-known people in them. You see, I mean, the Vortex was. There's something about lighting, because I did the Vortex, and Nicky Lancaster was played by Dirk Bogarde, who was. He'd done some theatre, but mainly movies, and he was very, very hot at that time. And his mother, Florence, was played by Isabel Jeans. Father was Nicholas Hannon. And we started at the Lyric in Hammersmith. I did quite a lot of shows in the Lyric at Hammersmith. And it was absolutely packed. I mean, the stall holders in the market down the side could hardly get to the stalls for the people queuing to try and get in. And it was so successful that we transferred to the West End, and we went to the Criterion. Dirk couldn't or didn't come with us, which was a great pity. Michael Gough played for him, and Peter Jones couldn't do the transfer, and I played for him. This is saving money as far as tenants was concerned. It was quite a small part, Bruce Mannering. I think I was a poet or something. But the little story attached to this is that my only scene was, sadly, with Isabel Jeans. And I can't ever remember rehearsing with her, and I can't think that she was terribly pleased that the stage manager was going to be playing a little scene. But my scene started the second act, so I had done the scene change and then raced on to sit beside Isabel. And I made sure that everything was okay, and then I gave the signal for the curtain to go up. And we sat on a settee, dead center, facing downstage, and there were about 5 couples, the remainder of the cast, and we'd all moved down to the country house, Isabel's country house. And we had an old-fashioned gramophone with a big horn. And Michael McKeown, the director, had arranged that this couple should dance around this center thing. And they all had a few lines of dialogue. And of course, as they came down stage center, so they had their few lines of dialogue, and then they danced around the back and such like. And then when they cleared, which they made as if not automatic, but they slowly cleared, leaving the space all right for us two to have our great scene. And I sat there for the first night, and I thought, I wonder what Isabel's going to do. Are we going to chat? I mean, should I be looking at her, smiling and doing nothing? And she sat there absolutely rigid. And so I thought, something's going to happen. Then she suddenly turned to me, and I thought, oh, we're going to have a little scene before it started. You know, we're going to have a dumb show. And she said, is this settee on its marks? But I started this talking about lighting because when we moved, and Joe Davis, when we moved into the Criterion, of course, Joe came. And suddenly, in the middle of a lighting session, Isabel turns up. I mean, you don't have your leading lady coming on when you're setting up and lighting. And she said, I've come to check the lights. And so we had to go through all the lights to make sure that where she was, and particularly that scene with me, that had to be specially lit, not my side, her side. And the famous dressing table had to be where she and Nicky had the final thing at the end. But it was also interesting that Coward came to quite a lot of rehearsals, and he couldn't make Dirk get the end of an act where he was on the stage by himself, and he went to the piano, and he was really het up, this Nicky boy, with drugs and everything. And he played the piano like mad, and you knew Coward had written that for himself, and obviously he could play the piano. Dirk couldn't play the piano. He was very good. He took time to learn how his ghost pianist off stage, you know, when his hand should be up at the top and when it should be down the bottom and so on. He was very good. But Coward kept saying, but don't you realize all your emotion is coming out in your hands? Oh, well, of course, Dirk's hands were just working men's hands, as you might say. They weren't pianist hands at all. So he couldn't get it, and Coward was really, really quite upset about that.
Bad cast.
Yeah.
That,
Yes. We drew the money in.
You must have. You toured also to Streatham Hill, you told me. There were sort of 6 lights above the stage at one point.
It was acting areas, yes.
Acting areas.
That was easier to light. Right, all on.
All on. And did you have much to do with Mr. Beaumont?
We hardly ever saw him, of course. He was absolutely superb. We opened a lot of the plays that I did down in Brighton, because it was handy to get to. And he used to come down to see the final dress rehearsal, probably the first dress rehearsal. And then he would go away with the director and probably the leading actors and so on, and would give the most amazingly good and very clever notes, because he came to see it quite fresh. So if a new play, most of them had been fiddled about with, it was often he'd say, well, you told me that such and such, the letter was going to be there, but I never saw it again. Oh God, no! Of course, because we cut that. We cut that, didn't we? Yes, we did. You know, that would go on. But he was very good at that. But then he always appeared for the curtain calls in the West End. He always did the stop and go for the curtain calls. I hoped it wasn't just me, and he didn't think I would know how many to give. But
he just walked into the prompt corner.
Oh yes, you felt a presence, and you looked, and there was Binky standing beside you, and he'd say, all right, and so you'd back away, and he'd sit and watch just the last few lines, and then do the curtain call.
Did he press the green button for the tabs to come in?
Yeah.
And out? And
yeah. Because I did again so many shows at the Globe, so he had to come down from the office to do it. If he wasn't watching the play, but he just came down to do it.
Just the first night?
Oh, just the first night. Oh, yes.
He trusted you after that?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yes. Yeah.
So that must have brought you in contact with loads of people, Henry Sherrick and Sam Wanamaker and a load of people like that.
Well, that's right, because I did The Vortex and White Carnation and something else with tenors, and then there was a gap. So I went to Sherrick and I became company manager for a show that Sam Wanamaker was directing, and Anne Todd was going to be our star, and it was a play written by Mary Haley Bell, and it was, the first act was in the most cuddly, gorgeous farmhouse there's never been, and then the second act was a war cemetery, so it wasn't a bundle of laughs, and it was a bit too close to the end of the war, I think. But Sam and my problem was Ann Todd, because if you met anybody in the street and they said, "What you doing?" "Oh, I'm doing this." And they say, "Ann Todd, oh, poor you, my God, she's so difficult." So Sam and I met before we started rehearsing, and he said, "Have you been hearing what I have about Ann Todd?" So I said, "Yes." So he said, "Well, usually if an actress has that sort of reputation, she's a stickler, and she wants everything to be right, and she can be difficult because she's not pleased with her performance, and that's just purely an internal thing. Or somebody has done something, the door slammed or a door didn't open or whatever, and she would get angry like that." He said, I think we can get over that." He said, "I'll be as good as I can be and help her I can from the directing side. Will you make sure that your stage management give her everything she wants, and always very quick on giving prompts and this sort of thing." And so that worked. I mean, she was absolutely wonderful, and we had absolutely no problems at all. The only problem I had was with Sam himself. We opened in the Theatre Royal in Birmingham, which has gone, alas, now. And it was one of these things where I seem to remember we got in early on the Sunday and worked all through the Sunday and all through Sunday night. And by the time we got to about 3 o'clock in the morning, we'd almost finished the lighting. We did, of course, Act 2 first, then got back into Act 1. And it almost was finished. And everybody was flopping about, quite exhausted. And Sam said, "Almost there, Michael. Now, you can see the table. Now, can you just give me a touch more light at the top end of the table?" So I said, and that would make it absolutely perfect. So I said, "Yeah, certainly. Okay, Sam." So I turned round, and the chief electrician was like this. So I waited a little while. I didn't want to wake him. So I waited a little while. And then I said, "How is that, Sam?" "That's perfect." I mean, I'm sure it's not the first time or the last that it's been done, but that was my...
But it's a good one.
And I never tell Sam.
No. Then you spent some time at the comedy. By this time you were moving towards management.
Yes, but by that time I'd done the Royal Court.
Ah, well, the Royal Court. Let's move there.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, that happened because, and you haven't mentioned Hedda Gabler.
No, I haven't. She's down here, though.
Well, you see, yes, I was just lucky. I got Hedda Gabler. I'd done The Prisoner. You haven't mentioned that.
I don't have everything written down, yeah.
Well, Ian Dowes sent... This has nothing to do with what you were just talking about. Ian Dowes asked me if I'd like to be a production manager. And I said, "Oh, yes, that'd be great." He said, "We've got a show, Seagulls over Sorrento." So I said, "Oh, yes, I've seen that." And it had been on the Lyric, Shaftesbury Avenue, for about 5 years. And he said, "We're sending it abroad." "Oh, good," I said. "That's lovely." He said, "To Egypt." "Oh," I said, "Oh, fine. I've never been to Egypt." So out I went to Egypt, and I was sent to Ismailia. And there I had to build a set. And all they sent me out with was a photograph of the one at the Lyric. And so I was allocated 2 people to help me build it. But before that, I had a very nice young boy from the RAF. They were all conscripts at that time, 53, I think it was. And this young chap was the draftsman, and he and I worked out how we were going to make this set. And it had to, I don't know if you ever saw the play, but it was a granite blockhouse or something in the north of Scotland somewhere. It had been an ammunition dump or something. But you had to have, it was very important that you had a staircase that came down and could be seen through a big upstage window. And then people who came down there came in through the entrance. That was the only way on or off stage. It was all male. But you had to see them. And I thought, I don't want a sort of a flimsy thing where these concrete granite walls are floating in and out as people pass them. So I built a proper set. It wasn't the easiest thing to do because the 2 people I was just talking about to help me, one was marvellous. He had been a master carpenter at the Cairo Opera House. But he didn't speak any English, and I didn't speak. Well, I knew Imshi, but that was go away, so that was not quite the right word. And his assistant was a lovely boy, huge, great, coal-black chap from Nigeria. He didn't speak any English, and I didn't speak any Nigerian. So it was, the conversation was limited, as you can see. And I also had trouble with the carpenter, because he brought his own little rule. And it was one of those, you know, that undoes, and then you open it up. And he used to do this, and it took ages to get it all in one. But he always forgot actually to sort of clip it straight. So it was always just a bit on the bend. So when anyone said 2'6", you know, it was not right. And he didn't like being corrected. But the worst thing was that as we were building this set, and I can't remember how, it couldn't be very tall because it was going to go into, go around the camps in the canal zone. And the cinemas and so on, the temporary huts, weren't very tall. But it was enough to be about 8 or 10 feet, I suppose. But what I never quite got the hang of when he went. But every now and then I'd be holding up a flat or something with the little chap from the Cairo Opera House, and then he'd gone. And I was left holding his flat. And where had he gone? There's a little wall, and he went behind the wall and got out his prayer mat, and it was prayer to Mecca time, you know, Allah. And he did this several times a day. And he just used to go and be away for some time, and then he'd come back and carry on as if he hadn't been away. It was really quite strange. But the worst thing was trying to get a set to make sure that it actually all fitted in the sand. It's not the greatest thing to make sure that your cleats are where they should be. But we did this. Then I must tell you this story because it was the dramatic one. This is drama. Arthur said, well, now you've got to go around all the camps and choose which ones you want to put the set into, which ones the company is going to visit. And a boy of about 12, it seemed, was driving us in a Jeep. And Arthur was there and somebody else beside me, and I was sitting at the back behind the driver. And we were driving up the road beside the canal. And those roads are tarmacked, but just room for one car going each way. And on the right and on the left were camel tracks. And on the right, just beyond the camel track, was this huge mound, which is where they'd thrown up whatever they needed out of the Bitter Lakes to get the canal made. And as we were going along, Arthur said to the driver, oh, there's the camp across there. So he slowed down and doing all sorts of getting into the right gear. It was not tricky. And then he turned to go over a narrow bridge and then go towards the camp. And as he turned, he stalled. And so he went, whoa, 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 whoa. So we just sort of sat there. And then I looked up beyond him and up this absolutely dead straight road. And coming towards us, lickety-split, was a huge American car. And he got nearer and nearer and nearer and nearer. And I could see the driver on the left-hand side. He was chatting to his friend because it was quite straight, you know. Why should he worry? And as he got practically on us, he looked round and saw us. He swung the wheel, and the underside of the car passed within inches of the Jeep. It really was quite dramatic. And it was thump, and he was only saved from going into the Bitter Lake by that great mound of earth. He turned over twice. They got out a bit shaken. We were very shaken. And eventually the little car went off. But that was quite a near miss. A near miss, yes. Near miss. It was quite amazing. I'd never seen the underside of a car so clearly before. So that was that. Then I came back.
Yeah, and then you came back, right?
What did I do after that? What did you say? Where did I get to?
Hedda Gabler, you talked about.
Oh, Hedda Gabler. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, and I came back to Hedda Gabler. That was very good. And that was Miss Peggy Ashcroft still. And I found, and George Devine was playing her husband, Tesman, and Rachel Kempson was playing Thea. And I realized they'd all been friends since sort of childhood. It was quite I never sort of felt that starry people knew each other. I got quite friendly with her because very early on she said, after a few days, she said, will you come up to Hampstead on Saturday and hear my lines? And I had to say yes, it's the last thing I wanted to do. And I went up and I found it was really like hearing anybody's lines, this awful thing of, do you stop them if they say can instead of may or something? Do you stop them in full flight of a long speech? And she got so angry with me, and I knew it was really angry with herself because she was just making these little mistakes. But that sort of cemented something there. We were quite friendly after that. And of course I worked with her so many, many times after that. But when we were at Hammersmith, this is another bit of drama coming up. It was very, very hot. It was a very hot summer. And we got to the final scene between herself and Judge Brack, who was played by Michael McLearmore. And she was in a rocking chair down left, and I was on the book down right. And Michael was standing in the center of the stage. And it was this sort of cat and mouse thing that was going on with her doing the rocking. And I thought, there's something funny about her. It's just something not quite usual. And so there was somebody standing by me, and I sent for the man to do the tabs. I said, stand by the tabs. So he stood by, not knowing what was going on, because we hadn't quite reached the end. And then I could stand it no longer, and I brought the tabs down, and as they hit the deck, she fainted dead away. So we rushed her up to her dressing room and got doctors and this sort of thing. And when I came down, our sweet, a wonderful man, Rupert Marsh, who was the company manager, I said, what have you done? Are the audience still there? So he said, no, I went out and told them that Miss Ashcroft wasn't well, and that was that. So I said, didn't you tell them how it finished? That she shot herself? So he said, oh, no, I didn't bother to tell them. Which I thought was a bit unfair. But anyway.
Anyway, but this was your introduction to George Devine.
That was the introduction to George Devine, exactly. And from there, we did a big tour. We went to the Low Countries. We went to Holland, and then we went to Oslo. And in Oslo, it was really, it was lovely. The show went amazingly well there, although in the theatre, Diet Neat Theatre, or something like that, the new theatre, we were cutting into a long run of White Horse Inn, the Tyrolean musical, whatever it was. And the whole of the theatre was Tyrolean. And so we played Hedda Gabler with this background of Tyrolean. And then we as a company, and I think there were only about 10 of us, were invited to a luncheon with all the heads of the Norwegian Equity, or whatever they call themselves. And we went to this amazing restaurant way up in the hills, and you were looking down onto the city of Oslo. And then the president got up at the end of the meal, and it was a long table, and then there were sort of side shoots coming down from that, because there were masses and masses of them there. And he got up and he said, he was obviously with Peggy beside him, and he said that the king had asked him to present her with a gold medal for excellence, and this was being able to come to Norway to show them how Ibsen should be played. Oh. So that was really great.
That was lovely.
Yeah, it's wonderful, wonderful. Just a little thing about George Devine and Michael McLearmore. George said that Michael was absolutely amazing, because there's a long scene when Thea and Hedda are talking, and with this production it was downstage centre, and they were in a room with these curtained portion, and then a round table. And he said, Michael used to tell me stories all the time. He never stopped. I mean, he was meant to be they were meant to be chatting, and he told these endless, wonderful stories. And yet he never, ever missed the, when Hedda has some lines like, take care, dear, I think Judge Brack can hear us, you know, this sort of thing. And it was always sort of, he was just do that sort of thing, which would have made her react to it. And the stories went on, but George said he never, ever missed a cue. He was just full of praise for this amazing actor.
So how did that lead to the English Stage Company?
That led to the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre, because I got back from that tour, and very soon afterwards Paddy Donnell from Stratford got on and said, would I be a stage manager for King Lear? That they were sending out a tour, a continental and Scandinavian tour, and one play was Much Ado, which Maurice Daniels would be the stage manager for, and King Lear was mine. And King Lear was directed by George Devine, and he played Gloucester. Sir John was Lear. Dame Peg was Cordelia. And so I worked closely with George on that again. I mean, it was easy because I knew so many of them, which was great. But the little story for that was when we got to Holland, Dame Peggy had her contractual month off. She used to go and see the family in the summertime. And she took a month off. And so Claire Bloom came to replace her. And way, way back, Sir John has said to me that before the howl, 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 would I pick up the Cordelia and hand her to him to save him bending down at the end of the show. So this is what I used to do, and I used to pick up Dame Peg and hand her across. And when we got to Claire Bloom, we never rehearsed that. Of course, she was dead by that time, so she only had to act dead. And so we, in the middle of a tour, you don't want to go on rehearsing unnecessarily. So we did up her scenes up to that, and that was so we didn't do that. So came the first night, and I went to pick up this sylph-like creature, and she weighed a ton. And I picked her up, and I thought, how do I tell the poor chap that this is what he's got? So hoping and praying that she was acting dead before she got on the stage, and I prayed that her eyes were shut, I did a sort of to Sir John, and he took her, and he went, and he was, howl, howl. I thought, I don't wonder it was... But that poor man, when we played Zurich, and I had a very nice little call boy called Hans, a Swiss boy, and unfortunately in that theatre, which was very big, and our set was about 30 by 40 foot wide, and the prompt corner was away from the other side of the dressing rooms, and I had a lot to do always in the intervals, and I got back to the prompt corner just as Hans came round to say, yes, all is well. He spoke very good English, and I'm not being silly, but he spoke, so I thought, oh great. So I sent the curtain up for the storm scene, so the storm scene went like mad, and then eventually on came the fool, Timothy Harley, and he walked across all by himself. Where's Lear? So I couldn't wait to talk to Hans to say where was Sir John. So I raced up the zone, a long way down, and got to the dressing room, and of course, luck would have it, his dressing room was up one floor, open the door. The dresser nearly dropped dead with this apparition in the door slammed, downstairs, must be in the canteen, down a long corridor, end of the corridor, the canteen door. And I got to that, and I did a sort of Disney stop, you know how the dogs go, like that. So I just walked in as if I just walked down the corridor, and I said, Sir John, you're off. Oh my God, he said, and tore past me, raced up, and by that time Timothy had been battling against the storm, poor chap, all by himself, making up Shakespeare, and they joined, and everything went on. But he was absolutely wonderful. But the other time, I mean, by the time you got, this is the Noguchi Lear, and Sir John started with a cloak with a few holes in, and by the time you got to the end of the play, there were huge holes, and by that time he'd had a long, straggly grey beard. And we were playing Hanover, and it was a matinee because they got an opera that night. And we got to the curtain call, and for some strange reason, I mean, they seemed to be miles away in this another vast theatre. And I thought, that poor old boy, now they've got to walk down stage, you know, and that was the next move before the tabs went up again. And as soon as the tabs came down, he did what was called a jitterbug in those days. He went all the way down with the company absolutely hooting with laughter following him down. So they took several curtain calls, and then I said, right, that's it. So everything cleared. So everybody went off. And the noise of the audience was just enormous. And I thought, I really can't stop there. So I raced to a much nearer dressing room, and he came running through. And by that time, the local, the German stage manager, had got the iron in, and the iron, for some strange reason, came round from the sides and closed, and there was a door in it. So by that time, he'd taken out the house tabs, and so as I came down with Sir John, he was standing by this iron door, and it was, I thought, quite frightening, but Sir John loved it. The students had got up, and they were hammering on the iron. The noise was making the whole theatre shake. And it opened the door, and there was this tremendous roar as he stepped out. It was just wonderful, absolutely marvellous. And so he stayed out there for a little while, and flowers were thrown and such like. It was a great
Came
reception.
back through the iron. Well, that's a one I've never heard of.
Yeah.
Curtain calls with the Iron Curtain.
That's right. That's and said, I'm doing auditions for a company I'm starting in a couple of days. Would you be the stage manager? So, I mean, I'd always been doing it for tenors. One automatically did these auditions. And so I did the usual thing, because it was only George. I mean, tenors would have Daphne Ryan, a whole cast sitting out there, all laughing, which is always so embarrassing. It's dreadful. You know. For it to walk on to do your audition and hear, ha 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 ha, and you think, God, what's wrong with me? But this is just George, and he was a man who really understood the theatre. And so I was sitting with the boys as they were coming in. He allowed about a quarter of an hour each, it was very good. And then I would take them through and introduce them and go back and talk to the next one. And one chap said his name was John Osborne, so we were talking, and he said, and my play is going to be done by George in the first season of this company he's running. I said, wonderful. And it was going to be then at the Royalty Theatre or something in...
Kingsway.
Kingsway, yes, I think that was the name of it. Anyway, so that was that. Then I did that. And then we went on tour. And when we got to Manchester, I can't think why, I think it was announced in the stage or something. So I went to George and I said, you know, could you think of me if you're thinking of a stage management? And so he said, that's, I mean, I had to see various people, but that was fine. So that's how I started with that. And we finished the tour in Stratford-upon-Avon. And we had a 3-week season there. So I actually saw the end of the season, which had Sir Lawrence and Vivian Leigh and Anthony Quayle and such like, Maxine Audley. Great company they had there. So I saw the end of that season, and then we went in, and then we came back, and so it was the beginning of January, whatever it was, 1956, that we started. And one of the it was difficult, because here Sam Wanamaker comes into it again, because we could have the offices in the Royal Court, but we couldn't have the stage, because Sam had got a production of Threepenny Opera on there. So we had to wait for that to finish. And that didn't finish till the end of February. So to prepare for an opening at the beginning of April, we had to do a huge amount of work before that time.
What was the first show?
It was called The Mulberry Bush by Angus Wilson. It was not the greatest piece. He didn't get too good notices. But what we had to do with the theatre, I mean, as soon as we went in, George said, right, what I will do is ask you to do this, that and the other, some of which you can do now, and some of which you can prepare for and get everybody standing by, such as cleaning the stage floor. It was a beautiful floor, but of course, it normally had carpets and cloths and so on it. But he said, we can't afford anything like that, so we should always play on those boards, so I want them to look good. And so as soon as the Sam's company moved out, we had that done. And then we filled in the orchestra pit. And he wanted assemblies, because he'd been used to them at Stratford and so on. So we turned the 2 stage boxes into assemblies. And of course, the floats had to go. One of the first things I said to him was, there's going to be so much work here, I shall need, I'm sure, more than 1 set of stage management. And at one time I had 5 because there was so much going on. But I said, could we have a rule that no stage manager is ever asked to understudy? So people who come to me for stage management will be stage managers and not actors filling in a bit of time. And so we started that, which was just fantastic, because it did mean that I got wonderful stage management.
I think a lot of people are in your debt, aren't they, for that?
I hope so,
Stage
yes,
management,
yes. I thought it was outrageous, you know.
When did the Osborne play go on?
That was the 3rd. The 2nd one was The Crucible. And we had trouble with that. I mean, that was going fine. And then a cable came from Arthur Miller to say that he understood that the character, I think it was Giles Corey, had been cut by George. It was a small part and saving money and so on. We cut that. And that he had to be reinstated immediately, otherwise the license would be taken away. And so George sent for Peter Duguid, who was up in Glasgow, of all places. So he came down. And wonderful John Welsh. I think he rehearsed 4 plays one day because of he was in so many of the plays. He played Father, for instance, in Look Back in Anger, and he was in both Don Juan and whatever the second one was, of Ronald Duncan, which was our 5th production. So Look Back opened on May the 8th and was as poorly received as all of them, actually. And we tottered on.
So when did it sort of suddenly become what it is?
Not really fully until October. We had a slight sort of frisson of interest because Robert Muller from Picture Post came down in June, and he was going to sort of stay with the company for the day and take pictures and such like. And he came down, and the company, I don't know what was the matter with the boys, they were so grumpy, they were really terrible. Kenneth Haig was at more than his worst, and even Alan Bates was very badly. I don't know. And they didn't like Robert Muller, they didn't like these questions, they couldn't see that it was some form of publicity. But Muller was amazing. When the article came out, there were very good pictures, and he called them the Good Companions, which goes back to the J.B. Priestley play about a company. And that gave us sort of, people thought, oh, there's something happening there. But of course, the trouble was, because we were in rep, and nobody understood drama being in rep. They simply didn't understand it. A good friend of Elizabeth and mine was John Whiting, and he phoned, he'd moved by that time down to the Ashdown Forest, and he phoned one day and said, I don't want to come up unnecessarily to London, but he said, I want to see Look Back in Anger, and I think it's a ghost play, because every time I want to see it, it's not on, and I don't think it's there. And that, it was actually, he was very right. I mean, it wasn't quite right, because it did appear every now and then, but what, as again, I suppose because of money, what the publicity people did, they put out a week's what was on for that week, and we used to do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, so they could see Mulberry Bush, Crucible, and they'd say, oh, we wanted to see Look Back, but it's not on. There's these other two plays on at the Royal Court. And so we'd lost them, and maybe it didn't come back until 10 days' time after that sort of thing. And that the rep did us a lot of harm. And we kept it going until September, and then thank goodness we dropped it, and then things began to perk up. But it really shot ahead, because something like October the 20th of that 1956, the BBC used to do 20-minute excerpts from West End plays, and they kindly called us West End. And they came down, and we'd had a meeting as to which scene from Look Back. 20 minutes, difficult to choose a good representative scene. And so George and I were saying, well, we must get one, perhaps one with the boys when they're doing the music hall act or something, and because we've got Alice in the background, that would all work. And Tony said, no, I want the beginning of the second act. That's when Father appears, Colonel Redfern, for the first time. And he was very opposed by George, who said, I think you're mad to do this. And Tony said, well, we're not going to do it if I can't do this scene. So there was not much argument after that. We did that scene, and it was amazing the success it was. It was wonderfully chosen, because it's a very touching scene, and it has the bit about the last time the sun shone was when the little train drew out of the station in India and such like. And it was amazing from then on, absolutely, immediately. And we had so many people, because I used to wander through the audience, so many people coming, young, sort of 20 to 30s, and they were lost, and you thought, they've never been in a theatre before, because they were trying to find out what the rules were. Where did you buy a programme, and how did you find where the circle was, and all this sort of thing. And it was amazing. And almost immediately we sent out a tour, and that did huge business. So it shot up simply from that broadcast. That's the real saving. It's
become lodged in the law, hasn't it, as a wonderful time of English theatre.
Oh yes, oh yes.
History.
Yeah.
And of course you had Sir doing his entertainer.
Yeah, that was the next April before that came on. I was called to George's dressing room one evening, quite soon after we opened, and to my amazement there was Sir. I'd met him before, because although you haven't allowed me to talk about it, we did do the most marvellous play called The White Carnation, which is a stunning story.
We're going to have another session. It's absolutely obvious. We're going to have to stop this one fairly shortly.
Oh gosh.
We've done awfully well, but
good.
At another time, but I thought at least we've got as far as the Royal Court, and your we've got Sir Lawrence Olivier.
Well,
into
I'll
the
just do
bed.
him very quickly.
Do him
But
and then we-
I was sent for in George's dressing room. I went in, and there, to my amazement, there was Sir sitting there. And he said, "Oh, dear boy, I wonder if you could find a way that I could get into this theatre without coming in through the front of house." He said, "I shall often be coming to see George. And as you know, I live in Eaton Square." As if I knew. You know I live in Eaton Square. And so I can come, but the press will get onto it, and they'll read all sorts of things into this. So I said, well, luckily there is a fire escape ladder at the back of the theatre. And if you come in off Bourne Street, you go through some cottages, etc., etc. And I'll give you the key to get into the theatre. And so he was often in and around. So that actually when he started rehearsing, he had seemed almost part of the company then. It was amazing. But the entertainer was just so exciting because we had music. We'd had klaxon horns when we did Beckett plays in the April, but this was something very special. It was just one funny little, I think, 5-piece we had down there. And so we took off the covers because I'd made the covers for the orchestra.
The pit,
yes. And I left it for a day or two, and then I looked at these huge queues and nobody could get in. And I suddenly had a brilliant idea, one of my many, and I went to George and said, "Look, may I replace the boxes, because they're sitting, we can't use them because the orchestra pit doesn't allow them to be used, and we can get some more cash." So our excellent master carpenter, Kevin Mabry, made the curves, and we got some coral velvet and put on them and put them back into use.
You've got about 5 extra seats either side.
4 seats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think, Michael, we will have to stop for now.
I just got to a very good
I
bit.
know you did, yes. But we all turn into pumpkins, courtesy of the museum, in a few minutes' time.
I can't believe it.
But no, it's been smashing, absolutely, totally wonderful. Jason will tell you as well.
I'd like to offer Michael our thanks on behalf of the museum, our friends who've come here today. I have to say, Michael, I haven't taken my eyes off you for the last hour and a half. It has been wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
And not many actors can do that. Absolutely astonishing, and I'm quite sure that we shall be inviting you to come to part 2, if you would.
We will.
On
Yeah.
behalf of the A.B.T.T, we'd like to present you with a tiny little memento.
It's a little lapel badge.
Oh, how very kind. Oh, thank you.
That will wish you back into our company again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jason. How kind of you. Thanks, Joe. Oh, isn't it? Yes. Oh,
I
yes.
think you stop that now. Don't pin yourself in, Michael.
Oh, no. Thanks.
Thank everybody for coming very much.